It's the modern interpretation of a classic formula. No power plus rear-wheel drive plus no weight equals more fun. The Subaru FR86. Before we can talk about the modern two-door sports car with a ridiculously complex name, we have to talk about the OG two-door Japanese sports car with a pretty simple name. You see, Toyota, before they made the Corolla suck, actually had a pretty good one, including a rear-wheel drive coupe hatchback. Now, when you have an incredibly lightweight rear-wheel drive two-door, naturally you're going to want to make it more fun. Not necessarily faster, but more fun. You see, it had a 1.6-liter 4A GE 4-cylinder. It made a whopping 128 horsepower, not exactly riveting. But when it weighs just 2,200 pounds, and has 50-50 weight distribution, and a good old-fashioned LSD, it is a blast through the corners. It is the original MX-5. The MX-5 perfected what a car should feel like to drive, and the AE86, as it was called, did the exact same thing. It was just as good as the MX-5 through the corners, but critically, it could drift. In fact, the origins of drifting date back to the Corolla AE86, because all you need to do is give it a little bit of power, a little bit of opposite lock, maybe some handbrake if you're really desperate, and it can slide all the way down the mountain pass. I mean, the Drift King himself, Keiichi Tsuchiba, used it to popularize the sport of drifting. I mean, it's an absolute legend, not just in the pop culture sense with all this automotive anime, or in terms of the sports sense, but it's just a damn good car. The Toronto AE86 is an absolute legend, and it's even more of a legend because they didn't sell many of them. It was only made for 3 years before the Corolla went back to being its usual boring self that we know of it today. But that didn't mean that people didn't love it. And this is where Subaru comes in. You see, Toyota owned a 17% stake in Subaru, and they sought to design a new sports car. And by they, I mean project leader Tetsuya Tada. He wanted Subaru to build a new boxer engine for their sports car. Meanwhile, Toyota would develop the chassis and the body. There was a problem though. Subaru loved all-wheel drive. Their Impreza defined the all-wheel drive four-door sedan. It was its epic rivalry with the Mitsubishi Evo. And they were not very interested in the rear-wheel drive sports car, and rejected the offer of partnership, which meant that the project lay dormant for over 6 months. Why? Because the Toyota guys had to shoehorn in a second-hand engine into this prototype car. So it didn't have the actual engine, but critically, it had a vision of what Toyota wanted to do with their rear-wheel drive sports car. So they invited Subaru engineers and journalists to drive the prototype. And once Subaru got their hands on the thing, they were sold, and the project was a go. In fact, Subaru was so committed, they gave Toyota the chassis and their turbocharged FA20 Boxster engine from the Impreza to their new sports car project. And that was good, because the Boxster gave it a lower center of gravity, which is good around the twisties. So, we have a Subaru Boxster engine, a Toyota design harkening back to the classic drifting cars of the 80s. All they need is a name. And this is where it gets a little confusing. Toyota called it the GT86, sort of a heritage of the 2000 GT from the 1960s, and the 86 from the AE86. Subaru, on the other hand, called it the BRZ, or Boxer Rear-Wheel Drive Zenith, and Scion called it the FRS, or Front-Engined Rear-Wheel Drive Sport. Regardless of the ridiculously overcomplicated naming system that they had, there was no denying that on the surface, it was a little bit confusing. Yeah, it cost just under $30,000 when it came out in 2013, but for a similar price, you could get an almost 300 horsepower Mustang EcoBoost. And what did you get with the GT86? You got just under 200 horsepower, 6 gears, and a 0 to 60 time of about 6 seconds. Then you had the tires, 225 tires on the back from a Prius. How is that a sports car? Well, just like the AE86, what it lacked in performance, it made up for in driving pleasure. Just like the AE86, it had a limited slip differential, and those tiny Prius tires actually served a purpose. They were designed to give you as little grip as possible, so you could absolutely slide it around any corner you pleased. It wasn't fast, but it was damn fun. It really, just like the MX-5, just like the AE86 or the Lotus, it really epitomized what driving a sports car could feel like. But unlike a Lotus, it was actually affordable, and you could buy one on a relatively normal salary. And it was a Toyota mixed with a Subaru, so it's not going to break down. It was a fantastic car and really brought back the classic 80s drifting cheap budget JDM icons of old to the modern era. It was brilliant. I mean, they sold 60,000 of the things in the first 3 years. But maybe you're like some people who who sort of missed the point and said, well, yes, but what if this fun, drifty, sideways, fun-having car, what if I wanted to go fast? I mean, it is a sports car after all. Fair point, it is a sports car. You're missing the point of why this vehicle is designed the way it is, but, you know, more power to you. Subaru has an answer. They call it the BRZ TS. It's basically a more track-focused version of the BRZ GT86, whatever. It's got better tires, Brembo brakes, chassis stiffening, aggressive aerodynamics, and new suspension from the WRX. It also got a bit more power to 205 horsepower, which was, yes, subsequently handed down to the other generations. And all that for just $3,000 extra. But there was a problem. Not just with the TS, but across the entire lineup. They launched it in 2013. And by 2019, they hadn't done anything to it. At all. They'd given it the mild horsepower bump to 205. Which is good, it was a step forward, but to be honest, after the first few years, sales fell off a cliff, and the only popularity the GT86 had was with the tuning community, which was plentiful, by the way. The vehicle is incredibly tunable, not so much in the engine department, but in terms of the body mods, you were unlimited potential. And even in the engine department, there was room to mess around. Cosworth made a supercharged version. Hell, Formula Drift had a Ferrari-powered version that somehow managed to cram a 4.5-liter V8 under the hood-ish. But it really was the pure enthusiasts that were keeping that vehicle remotely alive. It wasn't a very good sales success. I mean, in 2019 alone, Subaru sold just 6,000 cars, and people were fearful that they were going to discontinue it just due to lack of sales. That's what killed off the AE86, that's what killed off the S2000. These purebred Japanese sports cars designed for the driving feel do not have a big enough market if they don't continue to innovate. But have no fear, because innovation is actually here. Because in 2022, BRZ/GR86 is back. What is a GR86? Oh, they changed the name. So it's not based off the 2000, it's based on their Gazoo Racing. Well, you can't take the racing seriously. I mean, it's got the word Gazoo in it. How can you take anything seriously with the word Gazoo? Oh, yeah, World Rally Champs, Dakar Champs, Le Mans, okay, fine. They're fitting in with the rest of their lineup, and as you can tell, the rest of their lineup is pretty darn good. And they appear to be listening to the fans. thank God, because the fans have been clamoring for years that the GT86 needs more power. I mean, it's almost getting overtaken by the MX-5 at this point, which is the same style of car, just without the whole sliding aspect. And they delivered. Now, when there were rumors that they were going to increase the horsepower of these cars, everyone said they're going to turbocharge it. They're going to put a turbo on it. That's just what we have to do in this day and age. But the geniuses at Toyota and Subaru disagree and continue the natural aspiration of the GR86 BRZ with 228 horsepower now on tap. And while the statistics have not been completely finished yet, I mean, they just announced this thing back in November, it's looking pretty good, and if it's as good as the rest of their lineup with the Supra and their up-and-coming hypercar and the Yaris GR, we have absolutely nothing to fear. The GR86 will be in good hands.